I'm not someone who tries to just follow trends to avoid sounding cliche, but this morning when I woke up on Twitter, I saw Civil War Coming was trending, and so I had to see what that was about. And apparently, last night there was a Trump rally in Iowa. Increasingly looks like old Donald Trump is going to run for president again in 2024. Not a huge shocker there. And MSNBC had their reporter on the ground interviewing different Trump supporters, and they found a woman, older woman, who said, I believe her quote was, "I believe a civil war is coming. I do." And so there you get the trend, civil war coming. And there's lots of people, talking about this or whatever. And I don't want to get into specific things that, random yokels are saying on Twitter. That's not what I want to get at. What this made me realize is that, I talk a lot about the national divorce concept. I've been a fan of this going back to 2015, 2016, thereabouts is when I decided I thought this was probably the right idea. And I've noticed increasingly over the years, and this is becoming more of a problem as the idea, gained, mainstream appeal, is that too many people are conflating the idea of national divorce and civil war. And frankly, people are using the term civil war incorrectly because, they think of the U.S. Civil War instead of an actual civil war like, the Spanish Civil War or the English Civil War. And so as these ideas are becoming more and more mainstream, I think those of us who are in favor of a national divorce need to go out of our way to make it clear that a national divorce is a separate concept from a civil war. These things are not the same. They should not be the same. These are things that we're trying to avoid. In fact, I would argue a national divorce is a way of avoiding a potential civil war. Because a real civil war happens when you have different factions within one country that are diametrically opposed to one another who do not want the other to have power. And so they're so desperate that rather than letting the other party have power as a result of, let's say, an election, they're willing to actually fight a war against the other half of the country and try and take over the central government themselves and keep their enemies out of power. The utility of a national divorce is in breaking that centralized power so that neither side may have it, so that neither side may use the central power to oppress the other side and to create two or more new locuses of power so that at least the two sides that we think of now, at least those two sides could each have their own government separate from the other. Now, preferably, if you ask me, I would prefer there to be a lot more than two. I would want there to be at least 5 or maybe even 50 or even more than that. Because every time you do have a monopolistic state, there's always going to be factions within the borders of that state who disagree. And the smaller you get that state, the more homogenous the interests of people will be, because you'll have a less diverse group of people sharing one government. So there's an inverse relationship, as I see it, between a national divorce and the prospects for a potential civil war. Civil wars become more and more, I don't want to use the word necessary, but more and more likely as power becomes centralized. And you have these groups that live separate lives and have separate interests that all of a sudden are pitted against each other because of the nature of the composition of the state. And this woman who was interviewed by MSNBC, who believes that there is a civil war coming, she added the caveat that I believe this is the same woman, that she thinks Donald Trump is the one person who can avert that, and he can save the day, and he can make everything all right again. And so you have a lot of people on either side. You certainly had this on the anti-Trump side, and you have it on the pro-Trump side. People who believe that, hey, if only my side can win this national election and we can take over the central government, then everything will be okay because those other guys won't be in charge. But the problem is that if one side is happy, that means that the other side has to be unhappy in this kind of equation, which does not make us any less prone to having a civil war. And so the way I think that we should approach these partisans, who I think are not, they're not necessarily bad people, partisans. They believe that, hey, they're directly under threat from their political enemies, which is true in many cases. And they feel like if their side doesn't win, there's going to be bad consequences for them, and they might be true. But we need to give them an alternative to that, so that they have recourse other than, actually fighting their neighbors. They have some recourse if and when they lose political power. We should approach people like this who are genuinely concerned and are genuinely fearful about the state of American politics, and say to them, hey, either even if Trump gets in, that's not going to make everything better, or even if in the case of the anti-Trump people, even if you keep Trump out of power forever, that's not going to make all of our problems go away. Whichever side you're on, you're not going to be able to hold power forever. There's going to be some point where the pendulum swings back to the other people who you are deathly afraid of. That's going to be true for as long as you share a government with those people. And if you can get people who disagree on actual political ideas, ideological and cultural concerns, to agree on the point that, hey, we don't want to be ruled by each other. We want to rule ourselves and have our own communities. Then you can completely avoid war because you have common ground then. The common ground is we want to separate and form our own institutions. We want separate institutions for our peoples. And then you can have a peaceful negotiation of separation. There doesn't have to be any violence. If the blue states decided they wanted to leave, why would the red states want to fight the blue staters to keep them in? Or and vice versa, why would the blue staters want to fight the red state people to keep them in? Oh, because there's a few Democrats in Alabama? I don't think that people would care that much. Yes, there's still going to be a political minority on each side of the dividing line, which is why I would prefer that there were as many that there would be more than just one division. I would wish there were more than two polities. But, just for the sake of argument, let's say that we do only split the country in two. At least when the other side is in power, let's say you're a blue stater and you live in Alabama or Mississippi or something, and the red states separate and they form the Neo-Confederacy or something, and you really hate Republicans. You hate living under Republican rule with, their restrictions on abortion and all these gun toters walking around. Well, guess what? You actually have a recourse. You can go and move, to the blue state union, and you can live amongst people who are just like you, and want to live under the same laws that you do. You have an option. Whereas right now, if you are a Democrat in any state and Donald Trump is elected, Donald Trump's going to be your president no matter where you move in any of these 50 states. And the same is true if you're one of these pro-Trump people. When Trump loses, Trump is nobody's president, and none of you can, you're all stuck with Joe Biden. So the concept of a civil war is a terrible idea. It should never happen. It's one of the worst things imaginable. And the best way to avoid that is to take away the motivation. What is dividing people is the government in Washington. You get rid of that, you're not actually dividing the country. You can unite people in saying these terrible institutions in Washington are what's dividing us. Sharing one flag does not unite us as people. Everyone would get along a lot better if we weren't at each other's throats, if we weren't a threat to one another. Then you wouldn't have your righties and your lefties hating each other, because if they're not a threat to you, you have nothing to fear, you have nothing to get angry about. I mean, think how different the politics of people from other countries are. If you go to, Bangladesh or something, do you just walk around, with a sour face because you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe these people have different political beliefs than I do. These Bengalis, who do they think they are? Voting for, whoever their president is. No, you don't care when you go to Bangladesh because what they do in Bangladesh doesn't really affect you. You're just there as a visitor. You live in another country. You care about your own politics. It's the exact same thing that would happen if you split this country up. The people in, red state America would care about their own politics, and they'd probably, after a while, they would gain a more animus for whatever whatever the people on the two sides of their political spectrum is, because no matter how unified politically a country is, there's still going to be some spectrum. It's just that spectrum can't be so wide that people are diametrically opposed to each other. That's what we have in this country now. But after a while, people will probably have a bigger problem with the with the folks on the opposite side of their own spectrum than they would in the people in the other America. It's like the same way when you meet a British person. Do you really think about, do they vote Labour or Tory or, Liberal Democrat or UKIP? No, nobody thinks about that. We don't think about British politics. And frankly, we don't have to think about politics in California and New York either. Shouldn't have to. And so no matter whether, you're in a blue state or red state or whatever, if you're a part of the majority in your state, just talk to the people around you and say, you know what, do we really want to care about Washington? Or should we just try and, focus our energy in trying to get ourselves out from underneath Washington's thumb so we don't have to worry about these silly little presidential elections every 4 years? Our lives should not depend on how people vote in, all of these other places that are so far away from us and, have nothing to do with us. The movement for a national divorce should be something that is, from the bottom up across the political spectrum, because it benefits people everywhere. And for the few people who are very passionate about politics, who live in an area where, they are in the minority, if you really care about politics that much, you probably should live around people who are like-minded. That's what I would do. And for those of you who don't really care that much, well then, it won't bother you that much if you remain a political minority. It doesn't mean that they're going to send you to the gas chambers. It just means that, maybe at your local library they won't have Drag Queen Story Hour. Maybe you'll have to move to Oregon to get Drag Queen Story Hour at your local library. And that's okay. Different places can have different cultures. That's the way it's supposed to be. The United States is massive. It's got 350 million people. It's geographically ginormous. There's no way that it can be governed as a single unitary state, which, de facto is how it's being run now. It's a unitary oligarchy. So if you know anybody who's, seriously concerned about the state of our politics and about, the other side always winning or their side losing or something like that, and they think, oh my gosh, we're going to devolve into a civil war because people have nothing left to do but fight each other, maybe send them this video. I never tell people to, I'm bad at this. It's probably part of the reason why my channel doesn't really grow. I never tell people to share my videos, but share this with somebody like that. Just have them listen to this for a second, because there is an alternative. There's really no reason why people should fight. I certainly have no interest in fighting a war with anyone, because they, have different political ideas than me. That's just silly. Because fighting is never going to make people agree with you. If you have a disagreement with someone, you have to walk away. That's the only thing you can do. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.